So welcome everybody. Again here today we are covering the ARM 2024 changes. So basically as you get started this year with ARM, the ARM 2025, we're going to cover all of the changes, the features, improvements that we've made in the last calendar year. So any version 2024.0 through 2024.4, I think is where we left it off. As I mentioned, we'll just be mostly in PowerPoint today, unless our questions kind of have us dive in to a topic a little further. So we'll try to go somewhat quick. I like to get bogged down in details and get talking about a feature. I'll try to keep myself moving, but if there is a function here that's really interesting that we're going too fast on, feel free to slow me down a little bit. So the first one here is the protocol signature. And essentially, it's just a copy of the trial signature functionality that we have had in ARM for a year or two now. So if you've ever used that before, a trial file can be signed in the settings, and you're really adding your signature to that file. And so here the change is to be able to do that very same process with a protocol as well. So now we have either type of ARM file you can add your signature to. You would do this in the protocol settings or the trial settings, a little checkbox that says sign. And when you mark that checkbox, then you would apply your signature. If you haven't created your signature yet in ARM, there's that pop-up. That's the image on the left here, just an empty box. You can sign your name with your mouse, or if you have a touch screen, or you can also like upload an image. If you have your signature just as an image file, that can get inserted there as well. And then part of the signature process is to confirm your role in the study. And so the list of contacts from the site description are there, and you would select who you are to link with that signature. And once you have done so, you can see on the right kind of highlighted that is tagged as part of the study. So your login name and that contact that you saved are all associated, linked here as person who has signed this file. So there's also some notes. There's a note record that gets saved. There's a study rule that gets involved here, but this is kind of the bulk of the functionality. Like we said, it's the exact same thing as the trial signature if you've used it before, but now you could do this with the protocol. I think especially helpful for groups who are writing protocols, and maybe you have several individuals that work together on it and you want to have a way to verify that someone has signed off, this is ready to send on to the trialists, or whatever type of workflow you have. There's some kind of formality you can put into the file itself. Next function, very similar. It is the ability to mark a protocol as reviewed. So pretty similar to the signature. It's actually in the same spot in your settings dialog. And when you mark it, you're putting down your license as a person who has, in this case, reviewed the protocol. And again, this functionality existed in the trial file already. And now with the 2024 version this past year, we just added this same ability to a protocol. So key difference here, there is no signature that's attached. It's just a flag that this individual has marked this file as reviewed. And if any changes to that file occur after it's been marked as reviewed, the check mark gets cleared. So it's a way to, you kind of use it two different ways, of course, just having a file flagged that I myself have reviewed and everything looks good. That's one approach. You can also kind of go the other way to say, I'm going to mark this as reviewed so that way I can come back to this file and know whether any changes have been made to the file since I was last here, because that checkbox would be cleared if someone else from my group had opened and made changes to the file. Then that reviewed flag is cleared because now clearly I haven't reviewed those changes that I haven't seen yet. And there's a screenshot of that notes section where when either of these actions, a review or a signature, there's just a log of those actions in the notes. So those were the two big changes for protocols. Moving on, the kind of the biggest development I would say in the statistics realm in the reporting is a new statistical feature called equivalence testing. And so the basic idea for this type of analysis is that the AOV, that's kind of the standard analysis in ARM, we run that and we get mean comparison letters when we compare all of our treatments. And though that letter readout, if you have two treatments that end up with the same letter, that implies that those two treatments are not significantly different. And a lot of times you're kind of hoping for differences. You want to prove one is better than the other, things like that. And so if you have the same letter, you end up saying, well, they're not significantly different, but that's not the same thing as stating that those two products are significantly the same. So the idea of equivalence tests is to be able to make that declaration that two different treatments are effectively the same in their performance in whatever assessment that you're looking at. So a common example where you may want to use this, perhaps your company has a new formulation of some standard product. Maybe you're looking to make a generic that you want to be able to claim is just as good as the product already out there in the market. It performs just the same. There's no difference, but we can sell it to you for less, or whatever it is. And so you want that statistical claim that it's just as good. We don't even need to be better. Just as good is just fine for our sake. You would want to use equivalence testing to be able to make that claim. So there's kind of two steps to setting up the equivalence test. The first one is to decide what size of a difference between those two products we're going to compare. What size of difference is really insignificant? And so this really does fall on the research side of the fence as far as what in real life is the size that does not matter. And there's a couple of ways to express that. You could do a percent of the standard. So real quick, one step back, when we're comparing the two products, we refer to the first product, one, as the standard. That's the one we're comparing against. And then you select the other treatment that you're going to compare against the standard. So that's kind of what we'll keep referring back to, your standard treatment. That might be that product already out there that we're trying to compete against, for example. We'll refer to that as the standard treatment. So we can calculate the difference just as a percentage of that standard. So maybe we want to land within 3% or 5% from that standard treatment. Or maybe there's an absolute value that would define our range. If we just need to be within 5 bushels of that other treatment, that would be a small enough difference in yield for us to feel good about claiming equivalence, right? It's really a what's the size that someone would look at between these two products? Oh, those are basically the same. And really that's creating this limit, this upper and lower bound on that standard treatment that we're trying to target, that we're hoping our product will land within that range. And if it does, now then we can make a claim about the equivalence. So then the statistics within that, once you've defined those bounds, is we can run a hypothesis test. And so your null hypothesis would be that the difference between those two treatments is outside of our interval. And the reason for that is we're hoping to reject that null hypothesis, which would allow us to conclude the difference is inside that interval, which would give us equivalence. So we've got to do two different tests. Those are the little bullseyes there on the picture. Is our compared treatment lower? Does that come in lower than that lower bound? Or does it come in higher than the upper bound? So in ARM, we call that the two one-sided tests, or TOST is just the name of the routine, essentially, statistically, that is done here. So that's what it takes to run an equivalence test. Here's some screenshots from ARM with an example of just, let's do 7.5% of the standard. So you define an equivalence test in the settings, and you can do it either in a protocol or a trial. If you do it in a protocol, then every trial that gets created will have the same statistical setup. So that's kind of optimal, but you can start these in a trial as well. Just within the settings, there's the statistics tab, and there's a section right next to the planned comparisons that we added last year. Now we have a tab for equivalence tests. And then it's a similar structure in the fact that there's a table, and you can create more than one equivalence test if you want. Here I have just one that's been created, and you define the method that we're going to run. How am I going to define my bounds, that limit? In this case, I do a percent of the standard, and then what's the numerical value? So it's 7.5%. And then the treatment number of our standard, treatment number of the other treatment, which we call the alternative. And then the description is just a free text field that'll end up being on your report. So I like to try to have this be like a nice heading, try to explain what you're doing, because it will be in the output. Then all you have to do, there's not a separate analysis, separate report that you would run. It's built right into the AOV means table report. So you just have to turn on this option within the AOV means to include the equivalence tests. And if there are any defined in that one study, then this analysis will be run within the report. And here, that's the last screenshot. There's just this little table that is inserted right underneath your treatment means with the letters. Then this table is inserted right under that. And then the report just continues right beneath that is your descriptive statistics and everything else. So it fits real nice and neat into the existing analysis. And then for each equivalence test that you've defined in settings, those get run. You get kind of a variety of statistics. I've pointed out kind of the biggest ones we care about in the end are the p-values for the lower and the upper. So those match the two targets that we had in that screenshot before. And again, we're hoping for significance. If those both are significant, then we get to reject that null hypothesis and declare that we do have equivalence. And so the report has a nice little phrase there to summarize the result of those two tests. In this case, both are significant. So we have established equivalence between our treatment 2 and our treatment 3. There is also a confidence interval method. So that's why there's a designation for the method. There's another route. It's the same idea, just different set of math and a different way to express it in the end. But just real quick recap on it. The goal here is just to test whether treatments are effectively the same. So certain types of trials might have this handy as just depending on your objective, but certainly isn't appropriate for all of the studies that you're running. And the big thing research-wise is to be thoughtful about the limit that you're selecting of what is an inconsequential difference. What do you want to claim as your plus minus bounds? And we have a presentation that goes even deeper into all of the math, the theory behind this. So you have all the statistical calculations and how everything gets built, and there's some nice examples built in from there as well. This comes from our statisticians, so just fair warning. There's math, there's equations and stuff in there. So it's a fun read, depending on how much you like nerding out on statistics. There was one question here. I'll go back. Can you put more than one treatment in the alternative, or is it one line per comparison? And you're right, there is just one line per comparison. So maybe in this study, if I had 5 treatments and that treatment number 2 is my standard I'm comparing against, and then 3, 4, and 5 are different formulations, maybe they're different rates of the product I care about, I would just create maybe 3 different equivalence tests here. And I would compare 2 to 3, and then the next one would be 2 to 4, and then 2 against 5. And then that way, and you would just end up then with 3 different tables here. So each one of these then gets run separately. So yeah, that's how you would do it. You are limited as the comparison. It's just 1 versus 1, but then you can build upon that collectively by creating more comparisons. Good question. Okay, like I said, that was the big statistical change. There's a couple of smaller ones we'll cycle back around towards the end that will talk a little more statistics, but that was the big one there. All right, moving on to the assessment editor. We added a shortcut button here, just kind of acknowledging kind of a popular way to fill in the assessment header when you're performing an assessment. Maybe you've already done this once and you're going out again to perform that assessment. It's common to just copy the entire header section of what you filled in before and then just paste it into a new column. Then you just have to tweak some of the things that are different from last time to this new time. So we just added a shortcut at the very top of that column in the header to first copy a column. Then if you hover over a column that is completely empty, then that icon is a paste, and it lets you paste in what you had copied. So it's just a shortcut. Instead of having to select the entire column, just hitting that copy. We'll watch this one more time. That copy button next to that number 1, that took the entire description, and then we paste that in. It's the very same as if I selected everything and went Control C or right click and copy, and then went into column 2 and did Control V or right click and paste. Same thing, just faster. Just a little shortcut button to make it easy to go pretty quick. Also in the assessment header, we did add a new field. The field is called required. And the idea is to communicate the necessity of this particular assessment that's been defined. So a couple different designations you can make within this field. You can mark the assessment as required. which would, of course, try to communicate that this assessment must be performed. This is critical to collect this data in the trial. You could also use the alternative, the second option here. That's a way to communicate. I need to perform some assessment, but maybe the way it gets described is slightly different. Or maybe, depending on the trial or region that the trial is in, there might be a couple of different ways or different things to do. And so as a protocol writer, I'm going to put in, maybe 3 different columns for the 3 different ways or types of assessments that I could see being done. And I can put the alternative into all 3 of those to try to communicate that, please pick one of these 3. I'm going to send this, protocol out to 10 different trialists. So depending on where they are, they'll know which one to do, or maybe there'll be some communication later as to what one they should do. I just want to have a way to have my descriptions for all of them in the file already. So alternative is a way to say collectively, one of these needs to be done, one of these I need to have filled in, but there's a choice. And these are all of the options for you to choose from. And then finally, there's an optional rating. So kind of the opposite of required in some regards, saying, hey, here's an assessment. Might be great if you can do it, but it isn't as critical. So I've provided the header. So if you do this assessment, that's great. Use this description, but it's just recommended. It's not a necessity. So again, just a way to try to communicate, especially from the protocol writer, to have assessments described the same, but giving some flexibility, giving some communication as to which of these assessments are necessary and which aren't. And this field has already been in the SE definitions tab. So if you use SEs to plan out assessments, you've already kind of seen this function. Now it's just being brought to the assessment editor itself as well. Couple things that come from this field. If you do mark a column as required, filling in specifically that required designation, then if you validate a trial that is marked as final, there'll actually be a validation error if that column does not have data. So it's just a validation to say, hey, this has been marked as required. This assessment was supposed to be performed, and yet there's no data. And this trial is final. It's all done. How come there's no data here? So there is a validation that's associated with marking a column as required. Of course, if for some reason the assessment couldn't be performed, don't make up data. You would just put in a period. You can put in a period to mark as missing data for all of those plots for that one assessment. And that is a resolution, and that's kind of in the message as well. So it's clear to the trialist what to do, because obviously if it's too late, it's too late. That would be the way to resolve the validation error at least. And then finally, there's a message that will pop up if someone tries to delete a column that has been marked as required. So it'll pop up to say, oh, this column is required, so you can't, delete this column. It's supposed to be filled in, so you can't delete it. Of course, if you wanted to work around that fact, you could just change the field. So that way it's not marked as required, and that would be the way to delete the column. So if you're a protocol writer thinking, oh, this is really great, I do have some assessments I need to have in the trial no matter what, and I don't want the trialist to remove it, just two steps to do that. You would mark that column as required in the header, and then you could also put a study rule to lock that field. So that way someone can't just change the designation and then delete the column. Just have to be a little careful with that, of course. You need to be sure that that is an assessment you want there. Okay. Moving on to another section in the assessment, specifically your GPS coordinates. There's a couple of spots where you can record GPS coordinates, either on the plot level, you can have coordinates, or within the assessment itself. And so especially if you're using a data collection tool from us, like the TDC or the ARM mobile, you can use your device to actually record the device's GPS and save that to an assessment. What we added then is if you have those coordinates in either of those locations on the assessment editor, you can right-click on the coordinate, and there's a command to copy those coordinates to the site description lower left corner. So, this is kind of the de facto, where is this trial located? And so it's just a simple shortcut to be able to bring whatever recorded coordinates that you have. If you know that those are pretty good coordinates, I have a strong GPS device that I recorded those in, it can be kind of a convenient way to use those coordinates and just bring them into your site description as well. So quick and easy shortcut there. One last item here for the assessment header again. The timing fields, there's a variety of interval fields that get automatically calculated when you put in a rating date. And all we did was rename some of the fields. Previously, they were very abbreviated, and especially for beginners, just kind of hard to understand, what does this even mean? What is it trying to calculate? And mostly we noticed that each one of them had reference to evaluation. Like the first one was treatment evaluation interval. We thought, well, that's somewhat redundant. Here we are on the assessment editor. We know that it's the evaluation. Let's clarify that a little bit. So we got rid of the reference to evaluation and just explained, which gives us a little more space to be more verbal. It's the treatment application interval. The interval between the assessment and the application, or the planting date, or the pest establishment date, things like that. So no new functionality, nothing has changed other than just the label, hopefully more clear, especially for newcomers. Okay, moving into the site description. One of our larger features here that we added, taking a look at the section that we did call greenhouse to record your conditions in a greenhouse. We generalized this and renamed that tab because it's not just greenhouses where research is done. There's a lot of other controlled environments that also fit this bill that would use this information. So we renamed that section to be controlled environment, and just kind of refactored things a little to be more generalized for other types of controlled environments. Along with that renaming, we kind of overhauled the how some of the information is filled in on this section. And the main idea is really that this section goes hand in hand with the equipment that's in the study. So number one, the greenhouse itself, or your growth chamber itself, really kind of is a piece of equipment in the trial. Same goes for the light. If you want, we're going to document the light intensity each day, well, that light is a piece of equipment that really should be described and documented in the trial. Same thing for your irrigator. And so instead of having tons of duplicate information where, every day of the study filling in the same details about the light, the same details about the greenhouse, that makes everything look complicated. It's holding a lot more data than you need to. We're simplifying things by just creating a link between the two sections. So again, instead of filling in a bunch of details about my growth chamber every single record, all I'm going to do is link to an equipment number. So on the equipment tab of the site description, I would fill in my walk-in growth chamber, all of the details about that growth chamber in that trial. Then just for each daily record of the environment, all I'm doing is linking to that growth chamber. So this process is repeated kind of a couple of different locations, but the same workflow kind of fits. So here we'll start with the overall controlled environment designation here. So in the equipment tab is where you would start. I want to define that growth chamber. I'm defining my equipment. So all the details about that growth chamber, I can fill in on the equipment tab. Then when I'm going to fill in the daily records for the environment, things like the light and the amount of moisture and different things like that, now I'm simply referencing the piece of equipment. And that's all I have to mark down to know that's the growth chamber. And then I can fill in the rest of my details. So little bit of work up front. You do this once, you define it in one spot to start the trial. And then later on, when you're actually filling in the details, you're not adding that extra information again and again and again. And it's the exact same idea with the light. So we have light intensity as a value to record for each day. Well, I want to maybe, oops, going the wrong direction here. I'm just simply linking to all of the details I can define with my light. So in the equipment section, I would fill in my light and all of the details about that piece of equipment. And then I'm just linking to that when I'm on the control environment section. And if it sounds like a lot of work, number one, it is in total less information to add because I'm not filling in the UV light and the wattage and the brand name, all of those things. I'm only filling in once on the equipment section instead of having to fill it in every record in the controlled environment. And you can leverage the favorites list in ARM so that way you really only fill in the light details once. And then put in your equipment name, which is just free text. You can name it whatever you want and add it to your equipment name favorites list. And then that you can use again and again in every trial that takes place with that light or in that growth chamber or whatever you're defining. So make sure to use the favorites list so that way those pieces of equipment, all of those details, you really only ever enter once, and then you're just picking it from the list. That way you link this trial to that equipment. And last but not least, exact same idea, same structure, this time with irrigation. So as I define the irrigation method, the frequency and duration, I'm simply linking to all of the details of my irrigator that is within that growth chamber. This is one a little hard just to talk through. I think though once you try it in ARM, you'll just kind of draw that connection. It's hard when I'm just making up information that's not your own, especially just in a PowerPoint presentation. So it's a little hard to make it clear and simple. But once you do it once in ARM, I think you'll see it is actually pretty simple. It's just a slightly different way of looking at filling in information instead of having so many columns in one table, and your table just gets massive. Trying to be a little more dynamic by just linking the two. We're just going to reference that piece of equipment instead of just a completely massive table. That's hard to deal with. All right, a few another small thing here in the site description. On the Site and Design tab, there is this field called Experimental Unit. It's been there for some time. The change is to utilize this experimental unit to replace the word plot that we use so often in other parts of ARM. So historically, when ARM was first started, it was the herbicide research manager, and it was really focused in on one type of research. And over the years, we continue to generalize and expand into all other types of research. But you always end up with still some of those holdouts. And that word plot was definitely one of them. Well, not all research has a plot out in the field. Maybe I'm in an orchard, and my experimental unit, my plot, is a single tree. Or maybe it's a set of trees. Maybe it's 5 trees. So just trying to find a way to make it a little more user-friendly. It's simply changing that text. Instead of the word plot being everywhere in other sections, we actually just replace that word with the experimental unit that you've chosen. So hopefully just requiring fewer mental gymnastics when you're doing that type of research that isn't actually a plot. You can see just right on the screen, tree instead. And even in like option text in different areas of ARM, it's just that word. Hopefully just makes things a little easier to work with. So you're not translating that word plot all the time in your head. All right, next topic related to product amount calculations. This one here was a request from a seed treatment group. So when doing work with seed treatments, we've got the 1,000 seed weight information that is in your crop description. And that information is very useful if you wanted to calculate how much product you would need if your mix size is a weight. So if for my application itself, I'm going to treat 2 kilograms of seed, for example. That's my mix size. To make that application, I really need to know the seed weight if I'm going to be able to know how much product that I'm going to need. So the enhancement is to be able to link and pull in that information that's in the site description, be able to utilize that in the product calculations. And the way to achieve that is just to make sure to fill in the crop ID number. That's a column in the treatments editor. usually hidden by default, so you might have to make it visible first, and then you would link to whichever crop number. Usually it's one, but maybe you have several varieties, so you could certainly make sure to connect to the right variety. That creates the linkage. And now ARM can look up the 1,000 seed weight when it goes to calculate your product amount to measure. So it can know how many seeds would really be in that 2 kilograms. So that way we can know and get the right rate to know how much we need to mix up, how much we'll need to put into that mix size. All right, moving on to some reporting functionality here. First one, still related to the site description, the site description report, especially those big long tables. We talked about the controlled environment. Also would probably happen for the weather tab as well. Ends up being a very wide table, lots of different columns of information that you can fill in. And then usually it's a daily record, so there's a lot of records as well. The very large table makes it very hard to fit onto a page real nicely. So it makes it a little challenging for reporting. So we updated the site description report to be a little smarter when you have a big table like this. And so instead of just kind of running out of space on the page, ARM figures out when the page ends and continues the table underneath. So you'll see that we have the first 15 dates here in July, and we've got the moisture, the temperature, humidity, the wind. As soon as we run out of space, we pick back up on the next line. So then we do cloud cover and the radiation, soil temperature, and it's those very same dates. So we just repeat the date, of course, so that way the information still is logical and we know what it's linked to, but makes that report a little easier to read instead of just falling off the page or requiring that the font size gets shrink down a long ways or things like that. We did get some feedback on this after we initially rolled it out. It wasn't the last version of ARM from the last year. If you're printing the report out to Word, we found that several groups typically send their report to Word, and then to kind of deal with this big table, Word has a auto fit, kind of auto squeeze function for the table. And that worked really great for those groups beforehand. It would really shrink things down and compact it nice. And so there was really no problem with the old way. But because of this change, then after you shrink, these are two separate tables. And so it was not making the report quite as smooth. So in the next update, the first version in 2025, we will have this functionality linked to a report option. So that way you can turn it off if you want. So functionality will be there still, just if you're like, oh, this change wasn't for the better for my workflow, there will be a way to turn it off just in this next first version of ARM 2025. Another update here related to your site description report. It's related to the borders. So previously, you really had two different options was all. This one on the left with no border. If you didn't have any borders at all, you just kind of have every section of the site description and of the whole report just kind of flows together. Not a lot of separation. There's these headings, but they don't stand out all that much. Then if you did turn on borders, you would have what's on the far right, kind of a large border around the entire section. which does, quarter them off nicely, but it's also maybe a little bit loud having all four borders around it. So the new functionality, which is tied to an option here, is now you can choose no border, full border, or this new capability of just a single separator line. So we have just one line instead of all four borders. It's just the top border, essentially, around each section. So hopefully just kind of a middle ground between the two. It creates a nice separator without being quite as loud as the full border. Just another option depending on how you want that site description report to look. And you'll find this in the global border options. All right, just a note or two in the summary report. So we're back into the statistics realm for a minute. This change here is just I guess a clarification almost, trying to make just a very specific type of assessment a little more clear as to the analysis. So when you have an assessment that has no variation in your treatment response, maybe there was no pest pressure or zero crop damage. So your assessment is literally just all 100 or all zeros. Then there is zero variation, there's zero variability at all in those numbers, right? So there is really no analysis of variance that can happen. There's nothing to analyze. And so really can't do anything statistically. Previously, we just displayed all A's or no significance on the report, and you would end up with like zeros and ones for the F and the probability because there was nothing to calculate. And so this change was to just try to make it more clear that this really is different. It's a different type of result because there is no statistical result that we can present. So the two ways that's expressed, the statistics from the AOV table itself is just not a number, or NaN for short. I can't calculate a number. Saying that it's 1 or 0 isn't like totally true because there's just not a number at all. And kind of the same idea with the mean comparisons. There is no mean comparison that was even performed. And so it's NA, short for not applicable. Couldn't do it. And then there's footnotes at the bottom as well to try to make that clear. So again, this is only for specific types of assessments, hopefully just making it more clear that statistically we can't present you anything. And that's usually pretty straightforward. The one gotcha that kind of triggered some questions when we made this change is an assessment like this one here, where there are differences between your treatments, but within your replicate or within that treatment, there was no differences across your replicate. Seem to be, a lot of times it's if you go out and do a visual assessment and you're kind of just aggregating, all right, my treatment 2 is here, there, and there. Compare that visually with the check. Oh yeah, it's probably controlled to 25% or whatever. You then really only have one value, right? Even if in each replicate you put 25, 25, 25, 25, it's really just one value, right? So you end up with the same statistical result as the previous one. There is no variation within each treatment. There's just no variation. So I drew a box whisker here to the right to try to visualize that. It's a little jarring on the report because we present the treatment means, and there's very clearly differences between the treatments because each treatment itself has a different value. The problem is statistically speaking, when we look over here, there's nothing we can do statistically because there is no variation. We can't perform an analysis of variance when there is no variance to deal with. So we end up with the same NA and not a number output. It's just a little more confusing, perhaps a little less straightforward, the reason why. And so I try to stress that, NA, it doesn't mean there's no significance, because certainly we could make an argument that treatment 3 is probably different than treatment 2. It's just that we can't make any statistical claim. So we can't calculate statistical significance. You certainly have a numerical difference that you can claim, but just fortunately, there's no statistical conclusion that we can draw. So that's kind of a common one that we ran into, and some clarifications on it. On our website, we have a FAQ on this whole topic. Useful initially to help explain, when someone was coming with questions to us. It was useful to give that, to explain the issue, but I think it's also real helpful if you, the ARM user, are passing on a report to someone who asks you that question. What does this NA mean? What are you trying to tell me? You can send them to that article so they can understand as well. Because I think it is a very defensible position, a very good way to present that information, even if it will initially maybe trip some people up, because it's not super intuitive just on face value until you dive in to kind of look at the numbers and understand why that is. Especially when you have a case like this where it's sure looks like there should be, how come nothing's happening? All right, real quick, have just a couple more minutes, and I think we're just about to the end here. Just wanted to promote here our training. We talked at the opening with our LMS, that learning management system. That's our online portal with training videos. Initially, when we rolled that out, it was all about the ARM beginner certification. And that's been really successful. Anyone who is new to the software, it's a great way just to have them dive in and just understand how things work. And when they come out of that, 2 hours worth of watch time, taking a couple quizzes, that person knows at least how to make their way around ARM and kind of understand the overall way things work. And that's been really great. We also have simple tutorials with the tablet data collector and the summary across trials. And this last year, we've started to grow and added 2 more courses to the system, one for the mobile app, so ARM Mobile, our other data collection tool. We've got tutorials both for how to get that system set up. So as the main researcher within your ARM software, how do I get things set up for the mobile app people? Then there's a section within that course for the mobile app people themselves. Okay, I've got my phone. How do I download the app? How do I take notes? How do I take pictures? All of the things you would do within the app itself. So there's kind of two components to that course that are very handy. And then we also added a statistics course. So if you've done our webinars before, we always in the fall we do a whole month worth of statistics, going through the basic statistics. That's always our most attended webinars, and so we said, this seems perfect to create a course of that. So instead of listening to 4 hours of me ramble, we've compacted that down to I don't know the full run time, if it's half hour, 45 minutes or something, across the five or six videos with all of that content. So I think that'll be a real powerful one when that time of year rolls around, just trying to brush up on all the statistics and things. That course will be available as well. Couple questions here. The basic stat You only have three, 101, 102, 103. I'm not sure with the 101, 102, 103, I'm not sure what those numbers go with. If there's only three videos that you can view, that's definitely something we can check on to make sure that I configured it correctly when I'm assigning the videos. I'll check that out and make sure that that has all of the videos. There should be just one course that has a list of videos in it, but I'll double check to make sure that is the case. Then the other question, is it possible to print reports that only show the required columns in the assessments? That is a really good question. Let me pop up my ARM real quick. I think you could leverage the assessment view. I think that would be the best way to do that. So calling back to that assessment header. Oh, this is opening up on, see if I can get ARM to show up. Here we go. Let's just grab a tutorial file. Doesn't really matter what it is. So let me just real quick fill in. Here's that field, the required field, whether some assessments have to be filled in, maybe some of them are optional. I'll make a couple more of them required. So the question is, okay, great. I've got all of these columns. Maybe there's 25 of them that came from the protocol writer. Could I print a report with just those that are required? I think the first step would be over here on the properties panel, you can use the view. So here's a little shortcut button. Otherwise, if you use view options, you can get to the same control. And you could define a filter on the columns. So I would look in the required row and I could match using the little gold dropdown. Say I only want to view columns that are required. When I click OK and then apply, oh, what am I doing here? Apparently ARM isn't happy about my multiple monitors. Well, okay, we can kind of see it. I don't know why it won't go away, but here we've got column 1, column 2, column 5, column 6. You can see at the top there, those ones that aren't required disappeared. So it's only ones that are required. Then if we go into print reports, we can, let's see, which one is just the assessment columns? I think it's status report. That doesn't allow us, that doesn't let us filter though. You could do something, data collection, probably. Any one of these that will show you the columns that you have. There's usually an option for the view. Which columns do I want? And you could do the current view. Yeah, not data collection either. I'll just grab assessment summary, for example, that has in the general summary, which columns I want to view. I would use my current view since I've already filtered down to just the required ones. And so that should show me kind of that same deal where it'll only do the ones that are marked as required. I think I need to actually add that before it works. So there we go. You can see only the required 1, 2, 5, and 6. So that'd be a way to see only columns that are marked as required. Good question there. Okay, we're a little over time. So thanks everyone for joining today. Like I said, we'll post the recording of this and send that out. And hopefully maybe we'll see you next week when we talk about the treatments editor. So thanks everyone.